I'm home.
Throws to the near side, and that's intercepted. Intercepted by Jack Jones, heading down the near sideline, and this will be a pick six for Jack Jones and a touchdown for Arizona State.
People here, when you think of Sun Devil football, you think of Sun Devil for life.
Here we go, 7 seconds. Berkovici. He's just going to air it out deep downfield, and no white shirts around. Oh, Jalen Strong! Caught for a touchdown! Jalen Strong makes the catch!
I went to Arizona State. Right. I'm a Sun Devil, man.
This is about the Valley. We need the Valley. If we get the Valley all in, the sky is the limit.
Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
And I'm Joe Healy with DevilsDigest.com.
Joe, I think it's officially a trend. The Sun Devils in 2023 are not a second half team because that was a weird, sluggish, and you really can't blame Storms this time.
Yeah, it was a frustrating ball game against Oklahoma State, a first half that was pretty dang encouraging, and you thought that things were going to build upon that, and then ASU just hit a brick wall in that second half. And if you look back to the first game, that had certainly a sluggish second half with that hugely delayed halftime, that made a little bit more sense when you had to sit around for 2.5 hours doing homework, waiting for the ball game to kick back off. But last week, man, that was an unfortunate surprise. So here we are, 1-1 after 2 weeks with quite a few questions. It makes sense that there are them. So some of the questions may be a little exaggerated or maybe a little alarmist, but some of them are definitely for real. So we're trying to make sense of it. And of course, a big game on deck this Saturday against Fresno State.
Yeah, the Bulldogs are coming in, riding the nation's second best winning streak, second only to Georgia, who I've heard is pretty good at the whole football thing. Bulldogs won 11 in a row after surviving on the double overtime scare last week to Eastern Washington. We'll dive in to that game and that matchup with Bulldog insider Andrew Marden, who covers the Bulldogs out there in Fresno. Does a great job doing that. But yeah, we're going to try to get to the bottom of this whole why the Sun Devils are just not a second half team so far in 2023, but also there are a lot of injury concerns that we'll dive into here in a moment. A lot of guys that are banged up at some key positions that are probably going to affect this trajectory. So it'll be an interesting time, kind of gut check time, which is interesting to say in week 3. Stephen Miller, the former ASU offensive lineman, who's now a GA on ASU staff, coaching up those guys in the trenches, is going to join us a little bit later for a great conversation in terms of why he's back in Tempe and how the O-line's coming together. And running back Tevin White, who Kenny Dillingham specifically said after the game wants to get him more involved, to add an explosive element to this offense. He'll be joining us a little bit later on to talk about his role in this backfield.
And before we jump into the news for today, if you're anywhere near the market for a new vehicle, your first call, your only call needs to be to Jones Auto Group. Jones Auto has been servicing the state of Arizona and the Sun Devil community for more than 50 years with multiple locations across the state. They are as strong as it gets when it comes to their support of Sun Devil athletics and the ASU community. You already know by now that they are deeply entrenched in the NIL game, strongly supporting ASU and its student athletes. 4 members of this year's football teams are riding around in vehicles from Jones Auto Group, and it's your support of Jones Auto Group that enables them to be involved to that level in ASU's NIL strategy. The Sun Devil community truly is treated like family with Jones Auto Group. If you are concerned with credit issues or any other issues that might stand in your way from driving the vehicle of your dreams, don't worry about those. Contact Jones Auto Group. They're going to put together a winning game plan to the best of their ability just to help you out. So to do that, text or call Parker Jones, not just the owner and GM, but a third-generation Sun Devil alum and a die-hard ASU sports fan just like you. Here's his number, 602-881-8998. Once again, 602-881-8998. hit Parker up. He wants to hear from you and do business with you if he can help you out. So you can check them out online and browse their inventory of new and pre-owned vehicles at jonesautocenters.com. Jones Auto Group, Arizona's best since 1970.
All right, Joe, before we get into the MASH unit that is the Sun Devil 2 deep at the moment, some kind of daily or weekly pedestrian news, something that doesn't involve an injury. ASU's game against USC to open up Pac-12 play next Saturday is going to kick off at 7:30. TV is going to be national on Fox, so rejoice there. And won't have to resort to the Pac-12 network, but it's going to be the Pac-12 opener, a good USC Trojan team coming to town, but, of course, the expected time.
Yeah, this time of year, if it's in the month of September, there are like rules and regulations or laws or whatever it is. Like that is a thing. You can pretty much flip a coin. It's going to be like 7 or 7:30. I mean, there may be some small deviations there, but I think it has to be no earlier than 7 p.m., right? If it's in the month of September, played in the state of Arizona.
This is true.
There are things that make that happen. So I know that there are a lot of folks that don't like that if you're on, Eastern time zones or time zones that are a couple hours ahead of Tempe. Like I get that. I get that you want a day game. It just ain't going to happen. So Trojans coming to town, obviously a huge obstacle for ASU. You got to handle business this week before you even consider looking toward that. But again, should be to the surprise of 0 people that it's 7:30 kickoff in the month of September.
All right, let's dive into the injury issues. Now, you know what? Let's start with the good news first. Quarterback Drew Pine, 1 month to the day of his hamstring injury suffered at Camp Tonazona, was back at practice on Tuesday. We can report that. Getting out there and looked pretty good. It's obviously some rust after a month off, but Kenny Dillingham did say that he will be available for Saturday's game. Now, to what extent we will see, or if there's any kind of plans, we'll dive into that a little bit later. But good to see another capable arm back in the lineup for the Sun Devils.
So just instinct, yes or no? If Drew Pine never got hurt, would he have been QB1 from the start of the season?
Yes, I believe that to be true.
So we'll see what that amounts to now that he's healthy.
Yeah, so guys who are not healthy include pretty much most offensive linemen now. As anybody watched the game, sadly saw Emmett Boley, ASU starting right tackle, went down with a serious lower leg injury. His season is over. Really kind of a shame. He's worked hard, put on a lot of weight, and had secured that right tackle spot. Now I know we talked about some other guys that perhaps had eyes on that job, but Emmett Boley was able to secure that job, and ASU was already without left tackle Isaiah Glass, a guy that we both had very high on our most important players list coming into the year in terms of a guy who needs to kind of elevate his game. Cade Briggs, the transfer from Texas Tech, also out with injury. He did not play on Saturday night. Aaron Frost is still working his way back. He's not fully healthy. Joey Ramos, ASU starting right guard, did play, but if you noticed, his right hand is basically a club because he's got an injury and it's all taped up. And so kind of playing offensive line with one hand. So that's, I think in total 6 or 5 of these, 5 of your top, presumed 7, 8 offensive linemen heading into this year, either out completely or severely impacted at this point.
Yeah, that's a big, big concern. This offensive line group was without a doubt the biggest concern on this entire team heading into the season, and that was with a fully healthy lineup. So if you take starting players out of that, especially someone like Boley for this season, that's a concern. It's kind of reminiscent of last year. You lose Joey Ramos, I believe, was it the opener or in the very early stage, relatively comparable point in the season when he was shelved. You just cannot afford to lose these pieces. Now, obviously, it's not like you go out there intending to do that. It's just part of the game. But my goodness, ASU is due for some positive luck health-wise on the offensive line because they need to try to patch it together however they can because of this offense. Yes, there is some firepower there and things potentially could develop into some greater areas of strength than what we've seen in these first 2 games. But you have to call the offense a major question mark right now. And to have the O-line be depleted week after week, it's only going to make that more of a tumultuous situation.
Yeah, didn't even mention that Ben Coleman, who was brought over from Cal, a very experienced Pac-12 offensive lineman, who's going to be ASU starting left guard. He's injured in the offseason, and he's not available to at least, kind of some mid to late season point. if at all, this year. So just some hit after hit after hit. And that forced Kenny Dillingham and the coaching staff today at practice kind of adjust how they operate practices as a whole, because there just simply wasn't enough healthy offensive linemen to kind of have both sides going. So there were some different adjustments in terms of the work against the scout team, or even sometimes against just no opponent whatsoever, just because there weren't enough healthy bodies on the offensive line. And that really, I think, is going to be interesting to look at, Joe, on Saturday, just with the offensive struggles, the inability to get into a rhythm. You're having all kinds of new pieces there. We don't know the status, as mentioned earlier. Glass, Briggs, and Frost all questionable per Kenny Dillingham. So we don't know what the offensive line is going to look like, if Bram Walden's going to get a second consecutive start at left tackle. Right now you have Lee Fatanu and Sione Finau is the only presumably healthy or healthy adjacent type of bodies right there. Max Ihanachor, the junior college transfer, has only really been playing football for a couple of years. He was thrown into the fire at right tackle, had some ups and downs, very talented player, has a lot of raw skill, but just not a whole lot of game experience. So it's going to be very interesting what kind of game plan that this staff is able to kind of whip up, knowing that the offensive line is kind of, say, in shambles, but like held together with duct tape at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get some bodies out there. I know you talked to Steve Miller. I don't know if he can find some eligibility, get a couple games. Our boy Kyle Murphy, if he can maybe find something. We just need a patchwork thing. I mean, this is almost like going to start a movie script. They're going to maybe hold tryouts on campus or something like that, like a necessary roughness type of scenario for ASU on the offensive line. I mean, that's what you got to do right now, is just kind of joke and laugh about it, because it is a fairly miserable circumstance. Like I said, if there is just one group on this entire roster that you were concerned about and knew that you couldn't have a rash of injuries, it'd be the offensive line. And what has happened? Issues on the field and off in terms of play and injuries.
Now, of course, in reporting at practice, there are certain limitations in terms of what we can report, in terms of what we see out there. So I think this is going to be a week that a lot of the areas on this team are going to be kind of tested, and depth has been an issue. I mean, anytime you have kind of a year one, or I think in this case, ASU kind of qualifies perhaps as a year zero in terms of just the near total rebuild. Obviously 78 new faces on this roster, 50 some odd new scholarship guys, new schemes on both sides. A lot, maybe is the expectations in terms of, or maybe tempered a little bit, but man, when you have all this kind of disruption, and then like this, you expect some level of attrition, but coming out of week 2 in a lot of key areas, and offensive line, one of them, it's going to be interesting to see how this depth so early in kind of the program evolution and rebuild under Kenny Dillingham is going to be tested.
Yeah, because in a season like this, where there will be no postseason, no matter what happens, you want to find some small victories along the way. Obviously, you want to find big victories in the sense of winning ball games, but also areas where fans can get excited. You want to see them use those talented skill players, the Elijah Badgers, the Jalen Conyers, and so on and so forth. If your offensive line is either not playing up to snuff, or they can't stay on the field as a full unit, which is basically the combined scenario right now, then that's going to affect those skill players as well, because everyone on the entire offense, that's not going to flow like it should when that front line is not up to standard. So it really starts just avalanching things in a negative direction. Not trying to get too terribly carried away about it, but man, the early returns or lack thereof, and obviously the health matters as well for this offensive line. Quite a concern here. Again, just barely 2 weeks in the season. Though Saturday's game last week might have left a bad taste in the mouths of Sun Devil fans, and maybe a sinking feeling in the pits of their stomachs, the best way to treat your stomach and put a good taste in your mouth is by visiting Burrito Express, a family-owned business that began in 1995. With a combination of authentic recipes, competitive prices, and a comfortable atmosphere, makes dining with Burrito Express a unique experience. You've seen the passion that they operate with on Twitter in their support of ASU. You've seen how incredibly active they are in supporting Sun Devil student athletes with a multitude of NIL deals. It is safe to say, if you're part of the Sun Devil family, Burrito Express is a business well worth your support. Oh, and by the way, the food, as always, top tier, as good as it gets. Burrito Express has 6 Valley locations, 2 in Gilbert, 1 in Mesa, 1 in Chandler, 1 in Scottsdale, and the Tempe location near Rural and University, about a half mile from Sun Devil Stadium. They're open from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, with some locations open as early as 6 during the week and 8 to 3 on Saturdays and Sundays. You can order online at theburritoexpress.com for pickup or delivery. And be sure to give them a follow on Twitter and Instagram at BurritoEXP and on TikTok at BurritoExpressAZ.
Earlier today, I was out covering ASU's practice, and then afterwards, went right over to Burrito Express, got the BSB with the red salsa, ran into your DevilsDigest.com teammate, Caleb Campero. He was also getting the BSB. He did the Coben Bourget special, added chorizo there, so little pro tip there. All right, Joe. Something less appetizing than Burrito Express is ASU's performance, specifically in the second half against Oklahoma State. Another tale of two halves, and you could blame the weather last week. You really couldn't blame anything other than just kind of a myriad of issues that were kind of either injury related, coaching related, execution related. And Kenny again blamed the lack of rhythm coming out of the half. Now you could, of course, 2.5 hours. You can maybe blame some rhythm issues there, but just a normal game, no weather conditions to speak of, and just ASU just could not get anything going consistently offensively in that second half. A lot of short yardage struggles early on in the game. Thought, they were rolling out the wild scat package, if you want to call it, and having some success. But Oklahoma State was able to kind of make some adjustments and stay in their base 3-3-5 defense and ultimately kind of shut that down. And ASU really didn't have any answer because they were moving their safeties back, trying to take away that deep ball. And ASU just could not get the ground game going or the short passing game going, really, for that matter.
And that really was the tale of the game, the adjustments that were or were not made in the second half, because ASU looked to be in general control there in the first half. Things were rolling. Things were excited. People were having fun. And then you get out of the locker room to start the third quarter, and things just kind of turned to dust for ASU's offense. You talked about some of that, creativity or risk taking that was going on in the first half, whether it's attempting on fourth downs or going with that direct snap. I'm not going to use the other word. I know you got a creative one there as well, but that direct snap type of package. But they were going to the well so often in the second half. It became pretty predictable. And as you mentioned, Oklahoma State's defense was basically just able to figure it out, and ASU didn't have an answer for it.
Yeah, really kind of shut ASU's chances down, and were shut out completely in the second half. ASU has now been outscored 31-3 in these two second halves of this 2023 season. That's not going to get it done. You're able to maybe escape with the win against the likes of a FCS team like Southern Utah. Oklahoma State, not going to cut it. Fresno State and basically every other team on the remainder of this schedule, not going to get it done. And now we talked about it at the top. I know a lot of people are throwing Jaden Rashada under the bus, Bo Baldwin, Kenny Dillingham, and I think we'll get to the coaching aspect here in a moment. But I really do think that I think last week we talked about the offensive line and the concerns there, and I think I termed it yellow alert. Well, I mean, we're going full on red alert with this Sun Devil offensive line because the injuries are mounting up. The play of the guys that were in there in kind of week one, even when they were kind of in a more healthy spot, wasn't great. And it's not like the level of opposition is going to get any easier moving forward. So I just think right now you have a lot to worry about on the offensive line. And I think the big thing right now is going to be how this team adjusts, because you're going to have a weak point up in the trenches. And unless guys make some miraculous strides here, offensive line is going to be a sore point for the Sun Devil offense moving forward. We know they have a lot of playmaking talent, but if you can't, at least hold a little bit and make some holes at times, this is going to be a long, rough season.
Yeah, I mean, I was intrigued by what I thought was possible against Oklahoma State, because in their opener against an FCS opponent, they allowed quite a bit of offense to take place, but that just didn't really transpire for ASU, at least not when you measure the entire game. ASU only had 277 yards of total offense on the ground, only 110 rushing yards, 3.2 yards per carry.
That's, I believe, 44 and 2.9 respectively in the second half,
Yeah.
when the defense was giving ASU the run game.
And Jaden Rashada was sacked 3 times. So again, we say it time and time again, tale of two halves, however you want to look at it in that regard. But man, that was just an incredibly frustrating game for the offense. Really not any other way to describe it. Just some play calling that really left you scratching your head. I know that they're just trying to make things happen, trying to invigorate this offense, but there were things that worked for a little bit and then very decisively stopped working. As you talked about, a lot of that, the genesis of a lot of these issues hovers in that offensive line. and it has you grasping for straws, trying to figure out how that's going to get better, because it just seems to be getting sadly worse week over week when it comes to player availability.
Yeah, all right. So I got to ask you, Joe, because this was a big topic of conversation in the press box, but also since on social media message boards, since ASU made the aggressive. I mean, we know Kenny's aggressive, but going for it in that fourth down in like with about 6 minutes left at they're at their what, like 33 or so, 2 timeouts left. They decide to go for it, pass to Scadabo, or Scadabo is incomplete. Would you have gone for it there, knowing the night that Josh Carlson had in terms of his inability to flip the field?
It is kind of like a hindsight 2020 type of thing. I'm okay with the aggressiveness. Just maybe, play calling can be a little bit more creative. That's a tough call. I might have done it just to try to shake things up, but yeah, I mean, there were some calls that, the age old deal where if it works, it's genius. If it doesn't, then it's boneheaded move. And I'm just using, exaggerated phrases here. So I think it just falls into that category. So yeah, like I said, it's stuff that if it works out, like the 2-point conversion early, in the first half, going for that at a time that, it's kind of atypical to do that unless you're, I don't know, Lane Kiffin or somebody like that. I loved it. So once again, when it works for you, it's genius. If that hadn't, I, probably would be mad at it. So it's one of those flip of the coin deals. 1
for 5 on the night on 4th downs for the Sun Devils, and that one came in garbage time on I believe that kind of throw kind of like, I don't say quite a Hail Mary, but just throwing up to Guillory, and he came down with it for a 34-yard gain, kind of late in that desperation fourth quarter drive. So a lot of struggles in that short yardage, because after the Cowboy defense figured out the kind of the Wildcat package and ASU's answer, or even kind of the Jalen Conyers under center, try to get the push there as well. Those once those start kind of dried up a little bit, ASU really had no answer. The inability of the offensive line, the kind of the ragtag group there, to generate any kind of push consistently, kind of led to their downfall there. And mention also, they were kind of undone a little bit because the defense which we'll get to in more detail in a moment, really good. I mean, the defense kind of played well enough to win, but the struggles of the offense and just Josh Carlson having a really, really poor night. A couple, 3 of his 4 punts, sub 40 yards, and so giving the Cowboys some short fields. Now the defense is able to kind of bail them out a couple times, and even including after the interception by Rashada, but just ultimately just the execution errors there in terms of the short yardage and in special teams. Just when you're as shorthanded as you are, as the Sun Devils currently are, you can't have those breaks fall the other way.
Yeah, and I get it. Like, I feel for the staff, because you're trying to make things happen. You're trying to get some excitement going. You know that you're playing, kind of handcuffed because of the whole postseason ban. So you're kind of danged if you do, danged if you don't. You want to be aggressive. You want to go for it. You want to show the fans that you're going to be aggressive. But that can be taken too far. It does need to be strategic. And the overall summary of this whole thing, of course, is just a major concern about the offense and trying to figure out where this team needs to go in order to succeed. A concerning statistic that I dug up here in the last couple of days is that this is the lowest combined scoring total over the first 2 games of a season for ASU since the year 2000. And I think something like one of only 7 times scoring under 40 points across the first 2 games for a season in the last 50 years or so. This is just something that doesn't often happen, because you usually get those FCS opponents where you drop 40 plus on them, even if you don't really have a great season from that point forward. There were some Todd Graham teams, even the average ones, that would score like 100 plus in the first couple games.
The first game of the era was like 63-6 against NAU.
Yeah. So, it is concerning for sure. Not to say to give things up or, to subscribe to any of the numerous hot takes that we're seeing across the internet wide web these days. But again, here we are after 2 games, and there already are some legitimate questions that don't feel like we're just maniacally jumping to conclusions and taking a small sample and stretching it a further distance than it needs to be taken. It seems very obvious that there are a variety of modifications or adjustments that need to happen on offense, whether that means different personnel or not. I'm not necessarily saying that. but just there obviously have to be changes because the first 2 games offensively have left a lot to be desired.
Yeah, so we're going to see what Bo Baldwin, the offensive coordinator, has kind of come under some fire a little bit, and Kenny Dillingham, obviously 2 guys with some pretty impressive offensive pedigree on their careers or on their resume. We'll see what they can whip up, knowing the offensive line is in the current state that it's in. And this is a situation where the playmakers that we've talked about and kind of raved about all off season, spring and fall camp and over the summer, just I don't think are being utilized nearly enough. I mean, we have Elijah Badger had that 65-yard touchdown, but then other than that, just 2 catches, 15 yards. The inability to kind of just do anything beyond kind of the 10 yards downfield as well. Xavier Guillory had that crucial drop early in the 4th quarter that would have at least picked up that 3rd down conversion, if not and in a touchdown that could have perhaps changed the dynamic. And he's been a guy that's been absolutely nails in camp and practices. So it was really unusual there. Jalen Conyers just had 4 catches, but just for 17 yards. I mean, these are guys that we were thinking 4 for 17 might be a drive for Conyers based on what we saw last year. And, the tailback tandem of DeCarlos Brooks and Cam Scatterbrooks, they did their thing yet again. Scatterbrooks, as our guy Chili likes to call the duo. Brooks was able to kind of lead block his out of the Wildcat formation for the touchdown, but Scatterbrooks kind of struggled a little bit. 14 carries, just 62 yards, and just overall, you have too much talent offensively to have this poor of results in back-to-back weeks when the team really needs it most. So even with the bad offensive line, you hope that 2 guys with as much offensive brain power can come together and devise a more effective game plan.
And it's concerning that those top level players are not performing to their abilities. And then also like the depth guys that we were expecting to be key contributors, the Bryce Pierres, the Messiah Swinsons, there's nothing going on there. Stovall, O'Meary, ones that maybe they contributed in week 1, nothing doing in the box score last week. So, I mean, you just have a variety of guys. Andre Johnson, again, a great camp. What do we got? So, really, really discouraging in that regard, because it's not as though this team is devoid of offensive talent. It certainly is not that. It's not as though that they have a pedestrian quarterback. It certainly isn't that. They've got a very, very high ceiling guy in Jaden Rashada. So I think that's what probably creates a lot of the frustration among the fan base, is because again, it's not like they just have a limited stock to deal with. You've got NFL caliber players like Conyers, like Badger, others that can be very good college players. The group that we've discussed here, but just for whatever reason, it's not clicking, it's not functioning appropriately. Again, still a very early point of the season, not freak out time yet, but this game is integral. This game coming up is integral as far as getting it right, because you get into the Pac-12 slate, a lot of people who, for whatever reason, decide to support this conference and back the pack, so to speak. Those 8 ranked teams this year, 7 of them will be playing the Sun Devils. So it's only going to get more challenging as far as the schedule is concerned. So it is time to right the ship.
All right, Joe, I think it's maybe a good time for the quarterback discourse, because fans have had a lot of opinions after just 2 weeks of the season. Jaden Rashada did not have a great game. 16 to 29, 167 yards, a touchdown, 1 pick. You mentioned the 65-yard connection with Elijah Badger. Great block by DeCarlos Brooks, by the way, on the pass rusher there to kind of really keep that play alive. But other than that, just up until garbage time, that's the longest completion after that, just 9 yards. He was missing some throws, some timing was off, and kind of locking onto receivers that kind of resulted in that's his 1 interception. Just kind of freshman stuff overall. But I thought the play calling did not help him out a little bit, and really did not adjust nearly as well as it needed to. When asked about the quarterback position, Kenny Dillingham said, quote, "We got 99 problems, but that ain't one." So he is tripling down on Jaden Rashada. So I know a lot of fans are saying that Bourget could do this, or Drew Pine, now that he's healthy, could do that. It's going to be real interesting to see exactly how this quarterback position kind of shakes out, because Rashada, as you mentioned, incredibly high ceiling player. And it's just 2 weeks and 2 college games in his career.
Yeah, it's tough to put into perspective, because a true freshman starter at ASU, I mean, there's only been one that I'm aware of in my lifetime, and that guy had some incredible NFL talent around him, like Eno Benjamin, like Brandon Ayuk, who's killing it with the 49ers right now. So when you have that sort of thing, that helps. Now, obviously, Rashada has what we perceive to be relatively similarly talented players around him. They just need to get that whole thing going. So I get it. I get why, the thought process is to consider other options, especially when you're thinking about, okay, we've seen some success in the deep game from Rashada, some issues in the intermediate type of passing game. That's an area where a guy like Trenton Bourguet and perhaps Drew Pine thrive. So if you're looking at the piece that seems to be missing, maybe they provide that. Obviously, getting some life into this offense is something that all fans are pretty much begging for. And you look back to last year, and when Trent Bourguet was inserted in the lineup, that's exactly what he did, rejuvenated things in that game against Washington. And then when he was finally inserted in the starting lineup against Colorado, he had a similar type of thing. So I get where the logic comes from as far as fans wanting that to happen. I certainly do. So it's a really, really tough call, because you get into the conversation of, okay, what happens if you make a change, and what does that do for the development and advancement of Rashada? Can you bring in multiple guys? Can you do a 2-quarterback system? Heck, Oklahoma State has won a couple games running 3 guys out there. Why don't you just run them all 3 out? I mean, see what happens. So it certainly does seem, at least publicly, that Kenny Dillingham is sticking with Rashada, and I'm not saying that's the wrong decision. We will see what transpires over the course of this week. But I think this is a big proving ground. If it remains that Jaden Rashada is the unquestioned QB1, and if he gets all the snaps against Fresno State, minus if there happens to be garbage time either direction, this game against Fresno State is going to be a massive proving ground, because if you have offensive woes in this game like you have seen in these first 2 games, I think that almost forces your hands to make a significant change. So I'm not saying it's do or die. I'm not trying to put all the weight of the world on Jaden Rashada's shoulders for this game, but it is certainly a very, very important one, not just for him, but everybody on the field with him and the folks on the sideline that guide him. It is not a one-man show. It's just when you're the quarterback, things funnel down onto your shoulders for good or for bad.
Yeah, definitely some questions on the offensive side. We'll see how the quarterbacks, how the coaches, the play callers, the offensive line, the playmakers all respond to some of this early season adversity. Now, switching over to the defense, Joe, as we kind of wrap up the recap, pretty good. They put forth, I thought, a winning effort. They held the Cowboys to just over 300 yards, and really, they're getting after it early. BJ Green, an absolute menace, 2 sacks, a career high, 3 tackles for loss in the game. But I think the depth issues kind of were apparent as the offense continued to struggle over the course of the game. They just kind of wore down. It's kind of like mirrored a little bit of last year's game in Stillwater, where the first and third quarters, ASU's defense held the Cowboys in check, but just with the offensive issues that the Sun Devils had in that game, the second and fourth quarters, not so good. So I thought overall, the pass rush finally getting after it as well. Some issues that, I think Ro Torrance probably had the worst game of his Sun Devil career. He had a real rough go, had a penalty that negated a big time Clayton Smith sack. Some other times that he was beaten in coverage, very uncharacteristic. He looked pretty good and solid in practice today. So we'll hopefully see a rebound there. But, early, in that first half, they held the Cowboys to without a rushing yard, 0. And then 113 in that second half when they kind of pulled away there. But overall, they've been playing winning football. They're not making critical errors on a consistent basis. They're starting to see that kind of attacking mentality that was the calling card of that Brian Ward defense. And, if ASU is going to have a chance, and this offense is going to maybe take some time and evolve and try to find itself, if this defense is able to kind of maintain that level of play throughout, gives the Sun Devils a puncher's chance.
You want to see them get healthy, get some depth there, because, yes, it is encouraging when you have, first halves like they had, spurts like they had, but it can be a challenge to stretch that into full games. And again, looking into the future, you got some high-octane offenses that ASU will be facing in the coming weeks and pretty much for the duration of the season. There are a lot of powerful offenses in this conference this year. And so, once again, that can be a discouraging thing when you get a quarter or 2 quarters and the defense is rocking and then things fall apart, mainly due to maybe depth issues of the offense not doing its part and keeping the defense on the field, off the field, allowing them to get some rest. So not jumping to negative conclusions there. It's going to be a very good opportunity for this defense to continue to grow this week against a powerful Fresno State offense. The sacks those got on the board this past week against Oklahoma State, that's a positive. Turnovers still need to happen.
Yeah.
It has not happened yet. So that's going to be where ASU really needs to begin to thrive, because if they want to add some numbers to the win column against these powerful offenses, you got to take some possessions away from them, especially as this Sun Devil offense grows and acclimates to the year.
All right, ASU has a couple of home games left before they hit the road. And, of course, this is an exciting season ahead, still 10 games, so plenty of time for you to gear up in the best possible way. Thanks to our friends at homefieldapparel.com with officially licensed, incredibly comfortable vintage collegiate apparel, over 150 schools, including the Arizona State University. 24 amazing pieces in their collection. The Sparky Stomp the Bus that shirt is absolutely one of the best that they've ever done. If you know what Homefield's put out over the years, you know that's saying an awful lot. And the best of all, you can get a 15% off discount for your first order at homefieldapparel.com. Just put all the good stuff in your shopping cart, head over to the checkout screen. SOTD23 is the code, gets you 15% off. Make sure you support those who support us, our good friends at the good brand, homefieldapparel.com. SOTD23 is the offer code of choice. Now, as we kind of turn the page between ASU's last disappointing loss against Oklahoma State and kind of looking ahead to some challenges with the Fresno State Bulldogs coming to town, as we mentioned, the offensive line is going to be at the forefront there. And so after Tuesday's practice, I was able to catch up with Stephen Miller, who, of course, Sun Devil fans of certain age remember from his time as a starter on this Sun Devil offensive line. After a couple of coaching stops at some of the premier programs at the country, he's now back in Tempe as a grad assistant on a very ascendant coaching career, helping to get those guys in check. So had some good things to say there. And then after that conversation, you'll hear from ASU running back Tevin White, who hasn't gotten a carry so far through the first 2 weeks. But after Saturday's loss, Kenny Dillingham said that he wants White to be more of a factor because he brings an explosive element that, while, DeCarlos Brooks and Cam Scattaboo kind of bring that thunder element, White is, even though he's a bigger guy in his own right, has some more explosive big play capabilities. So first up, you'll hear from Stephen Miller and then Tevin White.
The offensive line dealing with some banged up guys right now. How do you feel kind of the overall vibe is right now with this group?
I think we're really process oriented, so we've just been focusing on that, focusing on the things that we can control and not the things that we can't. And we talk about it every day. You never know when your last play is going to be. It's unfortunate. I hope Emmett, is doing all right. And we've had some conversations, just making sure that he's doing all right mentally. Outside of football, he should be taken care of, and he'll be doing well. But we're just trying to rally around him and rally around the guys that have been banged up recently, and just continue to work. That's all we can do. We can't focus on the stuff that has happened. We can only focus on what we can control, and that's having a good practice today, getting in the film room, having a good day tomorrow, and then just preparing for Fresno State. We can only control what we can control.
What are some of the things that kind of jumped out about the film once you got to look at the guys against Oklahoma State?
I think there's some things that we got to get back to the drawing board with. Just in terms of our technique, just being fundamentally sound. There's some things that we coach up that they show their face, and with some of the youth and some of the new guys getting in there, it was a good opportunity for them to have a learning experience, see what it's like to get in the live bullets, and also get to hear and feel and see what's going on in terms of what we're talking about. Because sometimes you can talk about something in practice and you just don't see it until you get in the live bullets and you see it in the game, until you really understand what we're saying. Max and I had a couple conversations, and there was a few that he definitely understood, and we didn't have to say too much. It was an understood thing.
Yeah, speaking of Max, obviously kind of put in a tough spot there. Just coming a JUCO guy, kind of not a whole lot of years in the sport in general, but just how do you think that being a guy kind of thrown into a difficult situation, that he's responding and some of the growth opportunities he has?
He's done an amazing job. He just one day at a time. That's all we can focus on. And like I said, with him, just continue to control the controllables. You can't control anything other than where you're at right now and trying to get 1% better. And if you focus on that, we're gonna have a good week every week, and he's just gonna continue to elevate his game. He's a quick learner, so he's learning a lot of things fast. He's just got to learn some things on the fly as we go, and it's going to be with playing time, so it'll be good for him.
Some of the obviously chemistry is such a big part of offensive line play, and with some guys in and out and kind of injuries, mixing and matching. How do you feel that kind of that inconsistency of not having just, that necessarily kind of a consistent starting five has impacted the team so far?
I wouldn't necessarily think that it's impacted anybody too much. It's our job to, make sure that we can put five out there, and we're cohesive. Like, I think that we have a good group of players, and there's a bond there. We just have to continue to work and rep out those combinations. Like you said, there's a lot of combinations that you got to work, a lot of different combinations that you have to work and put people in different spots. But you just got to continue to work those and gain chemistry as you go. Like it's like anything, it takes time and it takes reps. And I've been there. I can kind of relate to the situation we've been in, somewhat of a similar situation relative to health on the front seven standpoint. And I think they're doing a good job. They're doing a really good job of just managing everything and continuing to be process-oriented, which is all we try to preach. Be a good person and be process-oriented, and things are going to work out in your favor.
What's it like just coming back to your alma mater and coaching them up?
Oh, it's been hot. It's been hot, but it's been good. I enjoy it. There's challenges in everything that you do, but it's good to be back home, and it's good. It's a different experience being up in the box, but it's cool. It's cool to get to see them run out and see it from a different perspective. I'm enjoying every perspective that I can. I'm trying to get as many as I can.
Well, did you know that when you were putting on the pads for the Sun Devils that you wanted to go into coaching one day, or is this something that kind of came along, a little bit later on?
There was some thought process, like my junior year before I graduated. I coached high school for a little bit. I was a freshman coach, so I kind of knew what I was thinking of after I got done playing. But yeah, it just kind of sped up the process a little bit with COVID and all that other stuff. But it's good to be back home. I enjoy it, and this is what it's about: sharing with the next generation the love of the game, and continuing to teach them, help them get better, and hopefully get them some M's. You know what I'm saying? That's really what we talked about, man. Just trying to get them to think the right things, do the right things, be the right person, and it'll pay off on the back end. That's really just what I keep continuing to preach, and it's been a blessing to be back and have that opportunity.
So how did you end up back at Arizona State? I believe you had some time at SMU as well, but prior to this, another.
I was at Louisiana Lafayette with Coach Napier. We went to Florida. I went to Florida with them, linked back up with Coach Sale, and Kenny got the job. I called him on the phone. I just called him because he was here when I was here my freshman year. It's actually funny. He was a GA, so it's kind of a cool full circle experience for me to be in that position, see where he's at now, and then have that that ambition, that thought process of like, hey, there's levels to this, and you can level up if you put the right attitude, you put the right work ethic in. That's really how it worked. Gave him a phone call, and then the rest is kind of we're here, and it's been good.
What's it like working with Coach Saga?
Oh, he's great. He's awesome. He holds the guys accountable, and it's not much different than what I'm used to. Honestly, he's a great human being. He's a great human being, great person to be around, and he demands and expects not perfection, but willingness to pursue that on a daily basis. And that's, like I said, it's the exact same way that I think. If you can think that way, put yourself process oriented, we gonna mesh always. So it's been a good experience continuing to learn from him, and he showed me a lot of stuff, taught me a lot of stuff already. I'm just continuing to be a sponge with him and learn as much as I can in as little amount of time as possible, because you never know how this thing goes. It's quick. Things change fast.
Fresno State Saturday night, what are some things that kind of jump out of what they like to do defensively, and how do you think that this offensive line is going to be able to respond?
They're a physical group. They do a good job. Just getting gaps and playing hard. They're a gritty group, and they've got experience together. We got a challenge ahead of us, but we're embracing that challenge. Every week it's a challenge. You just try and focus on the next team that we're facing. I think that their interior guys do a good job. They got some veteran leadership with that defense, and they got some good players that can make plays. We just got to take care of our business and be fundamentally sound, and just continue to work on the little things, work on the cohesiveness, work on those things in communication, and we'll be. I have a good feeling about this weekend.
Coach Dillingham harped on it even this morning. He said, in order to learn how to win, you have to learn how to lose. And I feel like the team took that to heart today as we practiced today. Not everything's going to be perfect. We're not going to have a perfect season, so we have to take that loss and we have to learn from it. We can't just take it as just emotional, we're going to lose, we're going to have a losing season. We have to grow upon that. That's how I feel.
What are you seeing from Fresno State right now that's saying that you're kind of telling yourself, like, this is what I kind of got to execute?
We harped on it when we started watching the Fresno tape, just from the running back point of view, just hitting the holes full speed. kind of been a struggle with that the last couple games. So I seen Cam even do it this practice, like just hitting it full speed, no hesitation, just go. That's what we've been harping on.
Awesome. Thanks, Tevin.
For sure. Thank you.
So after the game on Saturday, Coach Gillingham mentioned that he wanted to specifically get you more involved. You know, what was kind of your response to hearing that from Coach?
It's crazy you say that because I didn't watch the post-game interview, so I actually heard it from a teammate, and it actually surprised me. But you know, I felt good. Obviously, I know I do bring a little bit of different versatility to the running back room in terms of just bringing that speed. Me and Kyson both. So it feels good to hear that. So I just gotta show it whenever I get on the game field.
What do you think has kind of kept you off of the field for the first 2 weeks?
So a lot of people don't know this. I was out all the spring, and I was out 7 out of 15 practices just for a minor injury. So I feel like lack of film, lack of practices, and obviously if you're not available in football, you're really not going to see the field that much. So I've just been trying to be healthy, which is what I've been doing. I've been showing what I can do on the field, and now I'm working my way up to just getting in the game.
What kind of things have you focused on? Do you feel that you've kind of now shown the coaches, and then obviously, with Coach Gillingham's comments, you kind of won over their trust?
I feel like just hitting whenever I run the ball, there's just no hesitation. There's really no bouncing. If I'm on open field, maybe in a swing pass, I might juke. But once I get the ball and I see the hole, I go. I split the safeties and I beat them with speed. So I feel like that's what really stuck out to them.
That's the key thing to getting their trust, is that the ball is going to go where it's designed to go.
For sure. That's we harp on it all the time, like our tracks, our reads, because it might seem open in practice, but when it gets to the game, it's not going to be there. So, yeah.
And your whole life, you've probably just been able to outrun the defense in any kind of way that you want to, right? I mean,
yeah. Realistically, I was always a big back, even out of high school, but I was always a faster back. So I'm just kind of used to, once I see like that little crease in the second level, I know I'm gone. And I see the safers like too high, I know I'm splitting the safeties and I'm going for a touchdown.
Is it hard though to have the discipline when your instinct is maybe something different on the run versus with the way the run is supposed to go?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a lot of times when the coaching might go against instinct, but it's meant to help your instinct, propel your instinctual play. So that's the kind of the learning curve. Like you want to learn how to take the coaching and then add your instincts and talent at the same time.
What's it feel like when you're not getting not getting game reps that you want to be able to be getting, and you're having this dialogue with the coaches about what the thing is that helps you get more opportunities? Can you repeat? Yeah, what's it feel like when you're not getting a lot of reps in games?
And that's something I wanted to get better at this year. Cause like I said, my goal at the beginning of this year was just get reps. Even if it wasn't number one, just get reps, get experience. So this year I've been just trying to, even if I'm on the sideline, just help the team out, get mental reps, make sure if I were to get in the game right now, I would know what I'm doing. So that's what I've been trying to get better at this year.
The team's come out really sluggish in the second halves of the first two games offensively.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you guys feel are kind of the causes behind that, and it's also some of the solutions going forward to have a better showing to end the games?
Mm-hmm. I kind of said it before, just in terms of like conditioning. Even happened with me when coach was saying, how many more can you go? Just conditioning. Like I said before, I know coming into the season, we was getting breaks in practice. We would get a one break in practice. But now we're not doing that. We get a lot more tempo-oriented team periods. So that's what we've been trying to work on, just getting more in shape so we can come out second half more energized.
Before we go behind enemy lines to learn a little bit about the Fresno State Bulldogs, you're never an enemy when you visit the Spaghetti Shack, any of their wonderful locations, which, of course, by now is not just owned by a Sun Devil alum, but a former Sparky the Sun Devil owns and operates Spaghetti Shack. They've got 3 locations, one up in the cool temperatures of Pine Top, Arizona, 2 in the great city of Tempe, including an ASU location just 1 mile from Sun Devil Stadium that is open from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 11 to midnight on Fridays and Saturdays. Go ahead and get your fill of spaghetti, meatball sandwiches, and more. On Mondays, it's buy one meatball, get the second one for free all day. Or if you're like me, I get free meatballs, I think, for a year, not just because of the sponsorship agreement, but because I went on the grand opening of that ASU location. Tuesdays, they've got their famous spaghetti tacos. Catering is also available, and like all our sponsors, the Spaghetti Shack is deeply involved in giving back to the Sun Devil community and the Tempe community as a whole. So next time you're looking for some grub, support a Sun Devil small business owned and operated by diehard Sun Devils. That ASU Tempe location is 922 East Apache Boulevard. Again, 922 East Apache Boulevard. You can find them on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at The Spaghetti Shack, and on Twitter at spaghetti_shack. Check out their menu, hours, locations, and more online at thespaghettishack.com. The Spaghetti Shack, takeout for the pasta-loving people.
Joining us now for this week's Know Your Enemy segment to give us an inside look at Fresno State is Andrew Marden, the sports director at KSEE and CBS 47 in Fresno, and the host of Bulldog Insider. Andrew, thanks for coming on the show. How are you tonight?
My pleasure. Brad, Joe, great to be with you guys. Doing well. It's kind of crazy to think that we're already right in the midst of the college football season, because the NFL season just finished its first week and high school football has been going on for about a month. But here we are going into week 3 of the college football season.
So before we look ahead to this week's game, let's take a quick look back in time. After the 2021 season, former Fresno State head coach Kalen DeBoer, of course, moved on to Washington, where he's had immediate and significant success. When he left, back came Jeff Tedford, who had been at Fresno State from 2017 to 2019. So for those of us who were kind of on the outside looking in, not too tuned into that coaching change there, what happened? What created that scenario for Tedford to return to Fresno State after exiting due to health concerns just 2 years earlier?
Yeah, so Joe, Jeff Tedford was Fresno State's coach from 17 to 19. And when he took over the program in 2017, he was actually hired in November of 2016. In 2016, the Fresno State football team was 1-11. It was literally the worst FBS team in the entire country. Tim DeRuyter was the head coach at that time. They fired him with 4 games to go in the season, had an interim coach, but then hired Jeff Tedford. In 2017, he turned that 1-win team into a 10-win team. And then in 2018, he turned them into a 12-win team, which was the season ended with a win over Arizona State in the 2018 Las Vegas Bowl. So Tedford did great things his first 2 years. Then in 2019, the Bulldogs only won 4 games. Tedford was dealing with health issues, so he stepped away for an ablation procedure. I don't know the exact medical term, but there was actually talk that he might die from this, because the success rate, the amount of people who have gone through this that have actually lived, the percentage was low enough for people to be concerned. So we thought that he was done coaching and he stepped away from football. Fortunately for him, he felt great after the procedure, and Kalen DeBoer had enough success at Fresno State that he got a job at Washington. There was an opening again in Fresno where Tedford was living, so it seemed to be a no-brainer to just bring him back. And then last year, the team did really well with him, just kind of continuing. Well, I should say, started off slow. The Bulldogs were 1-4. They lost Jake Hayner and Evan Williams, 2 captains, starting quarterback, starting safety. And then when those guys came back, they rattled off 9 wins to finish the season. But that's basically it in a nutshell.
So many ASU fans, aside from that bowl game in 2018, probably remember Tedford from his time at Cal. Those peak years, though, were 15, 20 years ago. So for some of us, even though it kind of seems like yesterday, it was a little while ago, obviously done an outstanding job with the Bulldogs, as you just outlined. What has enabled him to be so successful in both his stints at Fresno State?
So Tedford's always been known as the quarterback whisperer. That's the name that's been thrown out there. And we could literally spend all day just rattling off the quarterbacks alone of guys who he's either coached or mentored. When he was at Cal, he discovered Aaron Rodgers. And obviously today the story is about Aaron Rodgers potentially being done with his career, not just the season with the Jets. But he found Aaron Rodgers at a junior college, Butte Junior College in Northern California. He's also the guy who coached Kyle Bowler, who made it to the NFL. He recruited Jared Goff, though he never coached him. When Jeff Tedford was at Fresno State, even before he was the head coach, he was the quarterback's coach and coordinator back in the early 90s. He worked with David Carr. He worked with Billy Volek. He worked with Trent Dilfer. So Jeff Tedford is known as the quarterback guy. But I think simply put, it's just over decades of meticulous attention to detail. Anybody who knows Jeff Tedford will say that he is involved with everything from, obviously, the plays, and even though he's relinquished play calling duties in recent years, he's still heavily involved. But he wants to know what time the players are waking up. He wants to know what time they're eating. He wants to know what time they get to the stadiums on game days. He controls practices. So he is very meticulous when it comes to not just breaking down film of opponents, but also making sure that his guys are where they need to be. And that, that sense of detail, that awareness, it translates, because the players follow that as well.
So from last year to this year, a handful of key departures for Fresno State. headlined by quarterback Jake Haener to the NFL draft, some to the transfer portal. What were the preseason expectations for this team? And though it's early, after these 2 close wins, how have things sized up to those expectations?
Yeah, so Fresno State going into this season, as you mentioned, they lose their quarterback, their starting running back, 4 wide receivers. Basically, all their offensive production was gone. And then on defense, they lose David Perales, who was a defensive end who was a mainstay on that line for a couple of years. They lose their starting safety, Evan Williams, who was a 3-year captain. The defense is okay. The defense is decent. But on offense, it was a huge question mark coming into the season because we didn't know what the quarterback situation was going to look like until a week before the season. That's when Tedford officially named Mikey Keene as the guy. He was battling with Logan Fife, who is actually a year ahead of him now. I guess he's technically a junior because Fife has, I should say Keene has 3 years of eligibility. So even though he's played 2 years at UCF, he's coming in as a sophomore and Fife is a junior. Fife is the guy who started the 4 games when Jake Haener was injured last year. And supposedly the competition was neck and neck. But after we all saw what Mikey Keene did in the season opener against Purdue, 366 yards, 4 touchdowns, the job is his and it's going to be his for the next 3 years if he wants it. But so Fresno State lost almost all of its production on offense. So coming into the season, the prediction was that Boise State was going to win the Mountain West and Air Force was going to be right behind with Fresno State in contention for a conference title, but not expected to win. Of course, Boise State goes out and loses its first 2 games this season, so we don't know what to expect there. But with Fresno State, yeah, they beat Purdue and they look really good doing it, except special teams was a bit wonky in that game. And then in the most recent game, guys, they come home, so it's the home opener. They've got an FCS school in Eastern Washington, and they trailed in the 4th quarter and needed double overtime to win. So I think my long answer to your short question is we don't know what to expect from this team come Saturday.
So that leads perfectly into the next question. Being 2-0, sure better than 1-1 like ASU is, or 0-2 like schools like Boise State. Was that Eastern Washington game just kind of like that classic emotional hangover after a big road win? What were your takeaways from what you saw last week compared to week 1?
Right. That is the general consensus, and that is my personal opinion as well, too. I mean, Fresno State they usually schedule an FCS team every year, or at the very least every other year. You go back to 2000, they're now 18-0 against FCS schools. I think it's an odd scheduling year for Fresno State because they go from a Power 5 school on the road to then a home game against an FCS opponent, then a Power 5 school on the road, and then they come home to host Kent State, which I guess is a peer group school. We thought going into the season that the Bulldogs would go 3-1 non-conference, figuring that they would lose to either Purdue or Arizona State. Purdue is a team that we didn't know much about because they've got a new coaching staff and they lost their quarterback, Aiden O'Connell, to the NFL. Arizona State's also kind of a wild card too because they're in a situation where, Dillingham's kind of breaking things in and we didn't know who the quarterback going into the season was going to be. You got that transfer from Notre Dame who got injured, who now may be back for this game, but you got the true freshman playing. So there are so many question marks there going into the season. But I think the expectation was that the Bulldogs would compete. They usually show up for these games. They don't always win all of them, but they usually do show up.
So Saturday is going to be a homecoming for Mikey Keene, of course, after his outstanding prep career at Chandler High School. What have you seen from him in these first 2 games, and what kind of threats does he pose to an opposing defense?
So Mikey Keene is very accurate with the football, Brad, and we talked to him earlier today, and we expected there to be a bit more emotion coming from him because he told us that, and I'm sure you guys already know this, that he never got recruited by Arizona State or by U of A. Both of his parents are U of A grads. And so growing up, for him, it was always kind of about that rivalry of, from Chandler to Tempe, it's like, 15 miles, maybe 30 minutes, in the car with traffic. So he grew up going to games. That's his hometown. You talked about the success that he had. And Chandler always seems to be in the top 25 of Max Prep's national rankings. Mikey Keene was able to get a Division I scholarship coming out of high school, but not to really his hometown team. We thought that there was going to be a chip on his shoulder, but he was so even-keeled today where it almost didn't faze him when we were asking him both about, Arizona State and the fact that he's coming back home versus the game last week. And his answers were all methodical and along the same lines. So it's a big storyline for all of us, but I do wonder if he could just kind of compartmentalize for this weekend. But I have a feeling he's going to have a lot of people there cheering for him. So, it would be natural if he got a little choked up before the game.
With the top 2 running backs on the depth chart kind of banged up a little bit, it looks like Elijah Gilliam has really kind of stepped up in a big way, 40 carries over these first couple of weeks. What are you expecting from the ground game? Are the top 2 backs in line to return against Arizona State, or overall, what do you expect from this Bulldog rushing attack?
Going into the season, Malik Sherrod was RB1, and he was the backup last year to a guy named Jordan Mims, who ended up top 5 all-time in rushing in Fresno State history. But what's interesting is Mims didn't get hurt last year, and he ended up utilizing his COVID year. So he was a Bulldog for 5 seasons. Actually, I think 6 seasons, but one didn't count because he used the medical red shirt. But he was terrific last year, and Malik Sherrod only kind of got spot duty in there. Coming into the season, he was the guy, but he scored a touchdown against Purdue, but Gilliam was really the back that made the offense flow. Gilliam is a walk-on, and so what Jeff Tedford has always done, with the exception of last year with Jordan Mims, he's always kind of had a running back by committee. So the anticipation is that they'll utilize 2 or 3 running backs in the game. I think Gilliam will get the bulk of the carries, but we'll see Devin Rivers. We'll probably see Sherrod a little bit if his ankle is back to a place where it's not bothering him. And then a guy named Jonathan Arsenault, who's also been injured, but he's healthy now. So Fresno State usually goes with the running back by committee.
Now, prior to this year, Eric Brooks had been a solid receiver for Fresno State, but has been unbelievable in these first few games, statistically standing as one of the top wide receivers in all of college football. What has turned things around for him? What's enabled him to have such an amazing start to this 2023 season?
That is a great question, Joe. Eric Brooks is very tiny. He's like 5'6". I don't know what it says in the actual media guide, but he is short.
I think it's like 5'7", 170 something. Oh yeah, 5'7", 171. I was looking that up earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if he stands on his tippy toes. I mean, he is the perfect slot guy. His story is incredible, by the way. Former walk-on, wasn't sure, what he was going to do after high school, ends up coming to a program, isn't guaranteed anything, and he just, the best way to describe it, guys, is he just came in and he worked. He's a guy who is now he's a team captain as a senior, and he developed a really good rapport with Mikey Keene. Like, he and Jake Haener had a good connection last year, but Jalen Moreno-Cropper was Haener's guy last year, and he is now hoping to land a job in the NFL. He's on, I think, the Dallas Cowboys practice squad right now. Brooks last year, I want to say, was like Fresno State's 4th best receiver, but because they lost so much production there, they needed a guy who was going to be consistent. And coming out of the slot, a guy who could just run slant patterns all day on you, Brooks is the guy. But he's also been a downfield threat this year, which is something, to be honest, I didn't see that coming. Fresno State has a lot of talented receivers who just don't have the game experience yet. Eric Brooks has kind of already risen to the top, and I think he's Mikey Keene's guy. At least he has been through the first 2 games.
Arizona State's offense has kind of struggled a little bit so far this season, but the defense finally got going a little bit. Pass rush especially started to find its groove last week. Brian Ward, the defensive coordinator for ASU, really likes to bring a lot of pressure. Now, what do you, on the other side, what do you see the offensive game plan for Fresno State, coming off a couple of 30-point games?
So Jeff Tedford always loves to say, and it kind of gets frustrating every time we hear him say this, guys, but he always loves to say, well, we're going to do what the defense gives us. Against Purdue, at halftime of that game, because we talked to the offensive coordinator, Pat McCann, he said that he looked down at the stat sheet and said, we're throwing the ball a lot. Like, we're very pass heavy. And then he said, but we're completing 70% of our passes, so we're going to keep doing that. Fresno State, if they have a quarterback who can roll out of the pocket, and we're still not 100% sure that Mikey Keene can roll out of the pocket successfully. Jake Haener actually was more of a drop back passer. The previous quarterback before him, they had a guy named Marcus McMarrion who actually beat Arizona State in the 2018 Las Vegas Bowl. He was a dual threat guy. Fresno State has not had a dual threat guy in a couple of years. We think that they're going to have a mix there, but probably a little bit more. If I were to guess, I'd say probably 65-35 pass to run. And I think that's because they are a little bit banged up in the backfield, but also because they have the wide receivers that they want to stretch the field. But the offensive coordinator, guys, Pat McCann, he's a first-year OC. So Fresno State's kind of feeling him out as much as they're feeling out the players as well. But yeah, Mikey Keene completed 70% of his passes against Purdue, about 59% of his passes against Eastern Washington, because what Eastern Washington did that Purdue didn't was they put more pressure on him, which forced the Bulldogs to run the ball a little bit more and also forced him to get rid of it a little bit quicker. And if I'm Arizona State, I'm looking at that game film from Eastern Washington saying, well, wait a second, those guys should have won that game. How can we do that on Saturday?
Now, flipping over to the other side of the ball, the Bulldogs have allowed 65 points over the first 2 weeks. And, of course, one of those is to Eastern Washington, an FCS team. What really kind of big things have jumped out to you most about looking at this Bulldog defense in action?
Well, they're not creating enough turnovers. And at the end of the game, Lavelle Bailey, who's also one of their captains this year, he got the critical pick, obviously, in double overtime to beat Eastern Washington. But Fresno State has gone in jumping back to the offensive side for a second here, they were 4 of 15 on third down conversions against Eastern Washington, which obviously is not going to get the job done. But it also means that while the offense is off the field quickly, the defense has to be on the field more. So Jeff Tedford does a really good job of conditioning these guys, but if you're playing double overtime, you're playing extra time out there, your guys are going to get gassed, right? I mean, they're going to be on the field for so much longer that sometimes it's tough to keep up with a team that's going to, keep the pressure on and keep everything physical. So they need to get their defense off the field a little bit more, and also they need to create more turnovers, which they've usually been good at in the past, but not this year thus far.
And of course, the Sun Devil offense has really kind of struggled, and especially in the second halves over the first couple of weeks. What kind of defensive game plan, what kind of schematic attack are we looking at? Are you expecting from Fresno State's defense on Saturday?
Well, the Bulldogs do have some very athletic linebackers, and their secondary, even though none of those guys, two guys in the secondary, Cam Lockridge and Carlton Johnson, they should be preseason all-conference players. Neither of them was, but they are both very fast, and they've got really good ball sense. They know how to get to the ball quickly. They can wrap up when it comes to tackling. Not very many teams are probably going to be able to run too deep on those guys. Again, I know Arizona State's got some very athletic guys and some really tall receivers as well too. But it's going to come down to their line and really the guys up front just putting pressure on whether it's Rashada or not. Whoever is back there is going to have to force quick throws into tight windows, and that's where Fresno State can really utilize its strengths. But they do have experience at the linebacker position and experience in the secondary. There is a disciplinary issue with Cam Lockridge. We don't exactly know what it was. He missed half the game against Eastern Washington, and all we were told was it was a violation of team rules. We followed up a couple of times, and that's all we got. So I assume he's going to play the whole game. If he doesn't, that's going to be an issue for Fresno State because they don't have depth. They have talent at the safety and corner position, but they don't have much depth there. So against Purdue, they had a starting safety named Steven Comstock who got burned a couple of times, and they benched him. They just said, "Hey, we're going to put somebody else out there. We can't let you. We can't let you be out there if you're going to be hurting us defensively."
All right, so obviously a lot of fans here locally know the name of Mikey Keene. Obviously, Brooks has made a name for himself early on. But when you look at both sides of the ball, who are some X factor type guys? Guys might be a little bit under the radar, but you think could play a big role in determining Saturday's outcome.
The guy that we keep thinking is going to have a breakout game, and he scored a touchdown against Purdue, Brad. His name is Jalen Gill, who's a wide receiver for Fresno State, and he's supposedly a threat on special teams, which we haven't seen yet, but he's back there, on special teams and also at wide receiver. He's a guy who's come from big-time schools. He grew up in Ohio. Initially, he went to Ohio State, though he didn't play much, then transferred to Boston College, and that's where he spent the remainder of his college career before coming to Fresno State now. Josiah Freeman is a young wide receiver who we expect to get in the mix, though he hasn't done much, yet thus far. And Jeff Tedford's coaching staff does a really good job with tight ends. I know a lot of colleges out there almost view the tight end as just an extra blocker on the field. They've got tight ends that can actually run routes, and they can catch passes, and they can catch touchdowns. And there's a guy named Trey Watson, who I'm actually surprised was not one of Fresno State's captains this year. Big, tall guy. He's like 6'5", 6'6". He's from New Mexico originally, but he's been involved in their passing game. So I expect Jalen Gill and Trey Watson to have good games if the Bulldogs win.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time and giving your expertise and insight into the Bulldogs. It should be a really exciting conclusion to the non-con schedule on Saturday night.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. And what's kind of funny, too, with this, I don't want to call it a rivalry because these teams played in 2018, but correct me if I'm wrong, before 2018, they haven't played since like the 1930s or something like that. I think they played 4 times all time, but like 3 times were way early last century. So personally, I love the fact that this game is taking place because my parents live in Surprise. And so I actually get to see them for a day when I come down, for the game this weekend. But it's an easy trip for Bulldog fans to make. Like Fresno State, not to go off on a huge tangent here, but Fresno State fans love it when Fresno State plays USC or UCLA because it's about a 3.5-hour drive from Fresno, and fans will make that trip. I expect there to be several thousand Fresno State fans in Arizona because it's a short flight. You can get there from Fresno to Phoenix directly, and fans just may want to have an extended weekend. So I think there will be some Bulldog red in the stands.
Brad, earlier this week, my dad, Tim Healy, voice of Sun Devil, celebrated a birthday. A sincere thank you from me to all of you, and of course on his behalf to all of you, the wonderful people who wished him well. If you've got a birthday in your family coming up or just any event you would like to celebrate with a generous gift, get on down to Cactus Sports to treat the Sun Devil fans in your life like royalty, or those who might need conversion to the maroon and gold. That's the best way to do that, with a generous gift from Cactus Sports. They're located at 514 South Mill Avenue in Tempe. And you can also put together the perfect Sun Devil fit from head to toe, whether you're in the Tempe store or shopping online. At Cactus Sports, they are as passionate about making sure you look your Sun Devil best as they are about supporting the maroon and gold on game day. If you can't make it to that Mill Avenue location, start putting together your ultimate Sun Devil gear wish list online at cactussports.com. Go ahead and stockpile it. They offer free domestic ground shipping on orders over $75. So spend some money, you get a little nice something in return. You can save that shipping cost. We all love that. You know what I'm saying? Follow them on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Cactus Sports AZ. Cactus Sports, ASU alumni, owned since 1992. Think local, buy local, be local. So the Sun Devils round out their non-conference slate this weekend with Fresno State coming to town. This is a team that has had quite a bit of success lately. Kind of surprisingly, these two teams have only played 4 times ever, which doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense when it's neighboring states. ASU has a 3-1 all-time edge in the series. However, those first 3 games, all ASU wins, were played between 1931 and 1941. And then more than 75 years pass until they meet again when Fresno State beat ASU a few years ago. You might remember it, the 2018 Las Vegas Bowl. It has been a wild decade for Fresno State. If you look back on how things have transpired for their football program, they won 20 games across the 2012 to 13 seasons, including 11 wins in 2013. Then over the next 3 seasons dropped to 6 wins, then to 3, then to a 1-11 finish in 2016. Jeff Tedford, a lot of, semi-long time college football fans, at least folks, maybe kind of Brad and my contemporaries, remember him from Cal in the early part of this century when he did some great things with guys like Aaron Rodgers and others, Marshawn Lynch and all that crowd. Cal was kind of a powerhouse when he was coaching them there. He came into Fresno State, put together a spectacular turnaround, taking that 1-win team and turning it into a 10-4 squad in 2017, then a 12-2 record in 2018, including that Las Vegas Bowl win over ASU to give Fresno State its best season ever with those 12 wins and its number 18 final AP poll standing. Those are both all-time highs for a single season in Fresno State football history. Things got weird again. Fresno State dropped to 4-8 in 2019. Tedford resigned after the season, citing health reasons that you just heard about. In comes a guy by the name of Kalen DeBoer, who after a 3-3 COVID-shortened season in 2020 guided Fresno State to a 10-3 record in 2021. He moved on to Washington. He's doing some pretty good things there in year 2. When DeBoer left, Tedford was rehired and yet again guided Fresno State to double-digit wins with a 10-4 finish last year, a number 24 final ranking that season. Bit of a roller coaster again, as you just heard about. The Bulldogs started 1-4, but got healthy, ripped off 9 consecutive wins to end the season. They're looking at 11 consecutive wins entering this game. Tedford has a reputation of resurrecting programs. We talked about what he did at Cal. He guided them to 2 10-win seasons among his first 5 years there during those Aaron Rodgers era seasons. And he had 3 double-digit win seasons in his first 4 full campaigns in charge of the Fresno State program. So what I'm saying here, this guy's been around, but he can get it done, especially on offense. I think maybe one of the more underrated head coaches that's been around the college game in the past several decades, because all that he's done is turn, Fresno State into a highly successful program or build on the success of others when that occurred. And as we saw, he did some magical things at Cal, which certainly have not been repeated in the years after his departure.
Yeah, he's built a pretty successful career. And yeah, this Fresno State team is, obviously, as you mentioned, riding an 11-game win streak, second in the nation, only to Georgia's 19. And what he's done the last couple of years in his second stint, and he's developed Jake Hayner into probably one of the most exciting college quarterbacks in recent years. But yeah, this is a team that's gone from laughingstock, but now is kind of elevated. Now it's kind of one of those teams that's you envision as being one of the better G5 teams in this country, and coming in that they've had one on the road, got a Big Ten win. Now, granted, you can question how good Purdue might be, but they're not Indiana. They're pretty solid. So that's an impressive win. Now, perhaps, the proverbial letdown game a week ago. But anyway, this is not some pushover G5 that's come to Tempe. This is a team that is, the odds makers, have them as a 3-point road favorite again over the Sun Devils. So it's a good quality program that is consistently a winner now, a very tough out with a very, very good head coach.
So you talked about, moving things from last season to this season, see what that Fresno State could do after a highly successful 2022 campaign. Entering this year, they lost all 5 of their first team all-conference selections from a year ago, one of which to transfer, the rest to graduation. You talked about Hainer. He's in the NFL now, as are some other players from that team last year. We talked about they're 2-0 now. They've got that 11-game win streak, that 39-35 win over Purdue in week 1, a 34-31 double OT win over Eastern Washington last week. It's been, obviously 2-0. The bottom line of that is that's real good. If you're a Fresno State fan, doesn't get any better than that. There have been some nail biters, some nerve-wracking moments in week 1. Fresno State overcame an 11-point third quarter deficit with a 22-7 run over about the last 22 minutes of play. Week 2, Fresno State needed a field goal about midway through the fourth quarter to tie against that FCS opponent. They missed a 35-yard field goal with seconds remaining in regulation that would have won the game, but after exchanging touchdowns in the first overtime, Fresno State kicked a field goal in that top half of the second OT, then ended the game with an interception on the first play. Eastern Washington ran from there. So I think this week is really going to prove a lot about this Fresno State team. Was that FCS scare last week from Eastern Washington just a bit of a trap game, that emotional hangover, things that happen a lot in college football? Was that the case? Are there some issues ASU can exploit? It's kind of like we talked about last week with Oklahoma State. We didn't really know much about them after week 1 and figured that game against ASU is going to prove something about them. That part did not go the Sun Devils' direction. I think a similar type of narrative can be thrown out there for this week because Fresno State is 2-0. They're perfect. But are they the team that went on the road to win in Big Ten country against a solid Purdue team? Are they the team that had a nail biter against an FCS program? Are they somewhere in the middle? It's a proving ground for both teams this weekend.
Yeah, we're going to find out about this Sun Devil team. We learned a lot and, kind of some things that were not great last week about ASU, and now they're coming in even more shorthanded. There was some other questions at other position groups as well, but there's still a lot of talent there that should be a competitive game. But yeah, this is a Bulldog team that is going to bring it to you on the offensive side, and it's got to kind of be strength versus strength, and then question marks versus question marks, because obviously the Sun Devil offense is struggling a little bit, and then we were facing a defense that just gave up over 30 points to an FCS team at home. So perhaps this has an opportunity to be a get well type of game if the coaching staff can kind of figure out what the Sun Devil offense is going to be able to do.
So taking a look at the offensive personnel for Fresno State, starting with quarterback Mikey Keene. Might be a familiar name for folks who follow high school football in the Phoenix area and recruiting from the high school level. He played at Chandler High School. He was coached by Sean Aguano for a little bit there during the early part of Keene's varsity career. Aguano's last season at Chandler High was 2018, which was Keene's sophomore season in high school. According to the internet, he saw some varsity action that year as a sophomore for Aguano. So a connection there, of course, not just with Aguano, but several Chandler Wolves that are on the Sun Devil roster as well. It's a homecoming for Keene. He spent his first 2 seasons at UCF where he was 8-3 as a starter, with most of his action coming as a true freshman in 2021. He entered the transfer portal this past offseason, came back to the West Coast to Fresno State to replace Jake Hainer, who was drafted this past spring in the 4th round by New Orleans. So far, it's been lights out for Keene. He is completing a little over 65% of his passes, averaging just a hair under 300 passing yards per game with 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He ranks 14th nationally in passing yards per game and tied for 9th in the nation in touchdown passes. He had 366 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception week 1 versus Purdue. Those numbers dropped to 233 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick last week. So he's thrown an interception in each game. He's been sacked 5 total times, 3 of which came last week against an FCS opponent. So you're seeing big numbers, big productivity from a talented quarterback, but maybe some areas that this ASU defense that we're starting to see surge a little bit, maybe they can take advantage of.
It'll be interesting to see just what kind of coverage schemes the ASU rolls out against Mikey Keene and these very talented Fresno State Bulldog pass catchers, because in that opener, Purdue played predominantly man coverage, and Mikey Keene, as Joe outlined, feasted, had a great day. Last week, Eastern Washington played a little bit more zone defense, and is, of course, getting after a quarterback and with the pass rush always helps, but that zone coverage, kind of stifled Keene a little bit there, and most of the success that he had a week ago was kind of short, rather than kind of taking some more shots and stretching the field in the intermediate and downfield games. So it's going to be interesting to see. We saw the ASU pass rush get going last week. BJ Green, Clayton Smith kind of getting after it, and obviously Brian Ward has made his career on being an aggressive defensive coordinator in terms of his play calling. We'll see if he's able to kind of come up with some more complicated things, bring some more pressures, and just kind of make Mikey Keene's existence a little bit more, miserable in terms of just getting after him a little bit, and also in terms of what coverages that they're going to be dropping in. Because I think ASU's got a pretty good secondary, but also facing off against a pretty good group of wide receivers for the Bulldogs.
As you heard about, Fresno State's been a little banged up at running back, but Elijah Gilliam has had a solid start with 40 carries and 2 touchdowns in his first 2 games. This is ridiculous. I'm going to be real with y'all. I have absolutely no idea how many rushing yards he has this year, and I'm going to tell you why. The Fresno State website says that he has 227 rushing yards, 93 in the first game, 134 last week. ESPN and the NCAA's website said that he had 86 yards last week. So there's one website from the school that says he has 227 yards for the year, and there are other highly reputable sites that still say he had 20 carries last week, but they did the math at 86 yards. I don't know what in the world's going on, or how something so simple, like I can get maybe like a tackle because someone can combine or whatever, but rushing yards by a player, pretty easy to track. I don't get it, but I'm just, sharing with you the information I gathered in my data. So he has somewhere between 179 and 227 rushing yards on the year. If it's that 227, he would be in the nation's top 15 in rushing yards. He'd be kind of 31st if it's 179. The weirdest dang thing. I guess I'll trust the school, though. I know sometimes the schools kind of cook the books. I know that happens sometimes. In any event, Gilliam has been productive, and they relied on him quite a bit. 40 carries in the first 2 games, kind of an Eno Benjamin type of thing, because no other player on the roster has more than 8 carries. And he only had 101 total rushing yards last year. He's only lost 2 yards on those 40 carries, according to the source that I got, and we'll see if that's accurate. However you slice it, a solid start for a guy that may not have been counted on to be their top running back.
Yeah, because he entered the year kind of a little bit lower on the depth chart. He was I think running back 3. Because Malik Sherrod, as you heard, is kind of was looked at as the starter, and then Devon Rivers, and if you put together Fresno State running back Rivers, and something clicks there, you're right, because he is a part of that Fresno State running back lineage. His brother Ronnie Rivers, and his and then of course Ron Rivers years ago. So a couple of the most productive backs in school history. Now there's a third. And both of those guys, kind of interestingly enough, are kind of smaller, speedier backs, about 173 pounds for Sherrod, 174 listed for Rivers. But Gilliam is kind of the thunder component there. He was a short yardage guy a season ago, 215 pounder. But as Joe mentioned, he's kind of been the bell cow, as some of these other guys have been banged up a little bit. So he's going to, we've seen this run defense for ASU kind of wear down as games go on a little bit, and they still have some depth issues at defensive tackle. So it's gonna be interesting to see, what kind of game plan, even though this is kind of a pass-heavy attack, or if Fresno State identifies that perhaps there are some opportunities in the middle of that Sun Devil defensive front. There's
some very talented pass catchers for Fresno State and for Keene to work with. Tops among the group, Eric Brooks is just having a dynamite start to his season. A small dude out there. If you see a little guy, the 5'7", 171 pounds, that's him. But man, he can take the top off of defense. He can hurt them in a number of different ways. In just 2 games, he has 17 catches for 265 yards, 3 touchdowns. He ranks 4th nationally in receiving yards per game, 7th nationally in receptions per game, and tied for 7th in receiving touchdowns. But he's tied for 5th nationally in that category, receiving touchdowns, among players who've only played in 2 games and not those who have 3 games, the teams that played week 0. He's also one of the team's top return specialists. You look back to last year, he only had 29 catches for 321 yards and 3 touchdowns in 11 games. Certainly not bad numbers, But if you do that math, he very well could exceed his receiving yardage total from all of last season in this game alone if he has about 60 yards or so against ASU. And the amount of times that they target him, very likely that will happen. He had 9 catches for 170 yards with 2 touchdowns against Purdue, 8 catches for 95 yards, and a touchdown against Eastern Washington. So this is a guy that's probably going to get targeted in the ballpark of about 10 times this game, if not more. He's been putting up monster numbers, no signs of slowing down.
Yeah, his work out of the slot has been pretty exemplary. It's going to be interesting to match up, with the ASU secondary. What kind of coverages? We talked about that. Are they going to play more zone, play some man up? D Ford has been pretty good. Maybe that's a battle of kind of similarly smaller stature type of guys, and that are also having pretty strong starts to their season. Jordan Clark, the team's nickel, has usually been one of the most reliable defenders. I don't necessarily figure you might see like a Roe Torrance there, although that would be kind of an interesting size discrepancy there. But ASU's secondary, I thought, has been generally a pretty good strength. But there's other options. Jalen Gill's there. The tight end is kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, a big dude in Trey Watson, 9 catches, 77 yards on the year. So, but you mentioned just Brooks has been absolutely explosive in terms of what he's able to do, both out of that slot and kind of the more traditional slot routes, but also a target that can stretch defenses and make plays downfield. You're averaging over 15.5 yards per catch with the catch volume that he has so far through these first 2 games. That's really saying something.
You talked about Gill, and he was mentioned before in our Know Your Enemy segment about someone that maybe an under the radar X factor type of player to keep in mind. He was not under the radar when he was a high school recruit. That's for dang sure. So he started his career at Ohio State, then to Boston College before this year. He was the number 3 ranked wide receiver in the nation by rivals for the 2018 class and the number 41 overall recruit. That is some elite stuff for any school, and certainly a lofty recruiting ranking for players that typically make it to Fresno State. You talked about Trey Watson. He's caught 9 passes in 2 games. You stretch that out over a full season. That's 45, 50 catches for a tight end. That's good no matter who you are. So even though Brooks has put together some incredible statistics and he's at near the very top of the nation in some key categories, he's not the only one doing it. It is not a one-man show. Gill has 11 catches for 105 yards with a touchdown. So really eager to see how ASU is able to cover these talented pass catchers. They need to be able to make life difficult for Keene. We'll break that kind of thing down in our keys to this game. But when you look at this offense, they've been scoring points. They've been getting yardage, especially through the air. A very talented quarterback, but also some areas of opportunity. As we mentioned, they've allowed a fair amount of sacks, 3 to Eastern Washington. So BJ Green and company, that is where ASU can strike.
Yeah, this should be the Clayton Smith breakout game. He had a sack called back because of a holding penalty on Roe Torrance a week ago, but he's looked pretty good, explosive. BJ Green finally kind of, unleashed that beast. In addition to the 2 sacks, 3 quarterback hurries as well, other tackles for loss there. Deshaun Mallory, I thought, has been looking pretty good. Agent 0 at defensive tackle for the Sun Devils there. So if they can get to the backfield, and it doesn't necessarily always have to just be sacks, just kind of disruptive play and getting in the quarterback's face and making him go off schedule. That can be a good major help to kind of mitigating some of these weapons for the Bulldogs.
Flipping over to the Fresno State defense, some areas of opportunity for Arizona State. Everyone wants to see the Sun Devil offense get things clicking, and there could be some possibilities this weekend. Fresno State only has 1 sack and 1 interception on the year. That 1 sack puts them in an 8-way tie for last in the nation. And there are some weird teams that are among those 8. LSU, Iowa, Georgia. How in the world does Georgia rank last in the nation in sacks?
That's interesting because the teams are passing on them because they got to play catch up.
Yeah, that's wild. So I guess that's some good company to be in at the very bottom of the list there. Obviously, it's very early, but Fresno State's scoring defense ties for 112th nationally, allowing 33 points per game. And as we talked about, it's been pretty even. It's not like they played some superstar team that put up 50 some odd points against them and they only allowed a FCS team to score 10 or 14. Again, it's been pretty equal among those first 2 games. They've been fairly solid against the run, 11 tackles for loss, allowing 121 rushing yards at 3.6 yards per carry, but 4 rushing touchdowns, 2 games. That's a little high. They allow about 244 passing yards per game with 4 touchdowns. Diving into some of the personnel that you'll probably be seeing out there making some plays for Fresno State, nickelback Maurice Norris Jr., a team-high 13 tackles. He also has 3 for loss in 2 games. Linebacker Lavelle Bailey, 12 tackles, 1.5 for loss, a sack, a forced fumble. He was the team leader last year with 87 tackles and a second-team All-Mountain West selection a year ago. Safety Dean Clark has 12 tackles. He transferred in this past offseason from Kent State. Defensive tackle Johnny Hudson Jr. has the lone sack on the year. Cornerback Carlton Johnson has been active, 3 pass breakups. Ties him for 15th nationally. Cam Lockridge at cornerback. You heard his name mentioned in the previous segment. He was a second-team All-Mountain West pick last year. He has 7 tackles, including a tackle for loss in this 2023 campaign. So there is some talent there. They lost quite a few players, whether it's graduation, transfer, that sort of thing from the defensive side. But you put this all together, and it certainly does look like an opportunity for ASU to strike a little bit on offense. I'm not saying this is the worst defense in the nation or anything even remotely close to that, but just when you look at the numbers and the things that have happened or not happened in these first 2 games, this looks like a defense that with the right game plan and execution from ASU, you could see improvement on offense.
Yeah, they're going to be running out of a 4-2-5 base. Now, of course, ASU had some problems with a team that played a 5-man base secondary a week ago, but I don't think that this is a secondary that's going to be on the caliber of Oklahoma State, though that's not to say that they're devoid of talent. Of course, you mentioned Norris is a very active defender out of that nickelback spot. One of the issues that they had a week ago was just allowing Eastern Washington to put forth together a lot of long drives, and something that you wouldn't necessarily figure an FCS team to do. Sometimes in those upset type games, or at least when the FCS team keeps it close, they have some big plays and some game breaking type plays, not the ability to kind of put together long sustained drives and keep the chains moving. Now that'll be an interesting matchup because ASU had those issues a week ago and kind of led to their second half downfall, the inability to convert on 3rd and 4th downs. But they should have an opportunity, given their playmakers, to have some advantages and some matchups that they like to exploit. So it goes back to, I think, the game plan that Dillingham and Bo Baldwin are going to execute there, kind of knowing obviously the issues at offensive line. So, a team that is having trouble sacking the quarterback versus a team that's been having problems keeping linemen upright, let alone their quarterback upright a little bit and the pressure out of his face. So it's going to be interesting there, but I agree with Joe that I think that this is an opportunity, given the defense and some of the way these things kind of tactically pan out, that ASU could probably maybe not get completely healthy in terms of a nice point total, but take some good positive steps forward.
Before we jump into our keys for this game, a key for you, if you are a Sun Devil fan, is to be a subscriber to devilsdigest.com. Be a member of the huddle, participating in all those wonderful discussions that are sometimes productive. A subscription to Devil's Digest not only gets you a wealth of content about the Sun Devils and virtually all sports that exist on campus, but it also gets you access to premium content across the rivals.com network. You want to learn about other schools? You want to learn about recruiting? You just want to follow college athletics as a whole? No better place than rivals.com. And of course, ASU, their page there is called devilsdigest.com. I should know. I've been there for, a little over 15 years now. So if you're listening to the show, you're not subscribed to the huddle quite yet, you got to break that streak. Jump into it. If you're not subscribed to Devil's Digest, that's why ASU lost last week, is what I'm going to say. So you can correct that by becoming a member of devilsdigest.com. So I will jump into the keys to get things started. First one to me, kind of obvious. Find some way to get this offense going. To me, unless this defense plays completely out of their skulls, you're not winning this game against Fresno State unless you get a minimum of 30 points, probably closer to the 35-point range because of what Fresno State can do on offense. Usually that's not a horribly big ask to score 30 points in a college football game, but through these first 2 weeks, it's just simply something that has not been seen yet. I mean, you have fewer than 40 points across those first 2 games.
We did live through the Herm Edwards era.
That is true. Perspective is important in these circumstances. So that comes down to the execution on the field. That comes to this coaching staff preparing prior to game day and obviously doing their part in execution on game day. We saw some unique risks that were taken, some creativity that in the early stretch of the game made sense and created a positive impact, but I feel like they went to the well far too often. The second half, that did not happen. So this is where you really want to see the best that the staff has together. Kenny Dillingham, rightfully so, has a very strong reputation as an offensive mind, and especially with quarterbacks. Bo Baldwin has a lot of experience as an offensive coordinator and as a head coach. He has coached and effectively coached some very talented offensive players. This is a game where just they need to draw a line in the sand and make sure that this team succeeds offensively.
Yeah, and my number one key is kind of on a similar note. Just you got to do it for the full 60 minutes, not just the 30 minutes that we've seen the last couple of weeks. You cannot continue to be a first half only team. There's too much talent on this roster, even with a kind of a banged up offensive line, to be that bad. Now, I think that's obviously execution in terms of, with the players in the field, going back to key mistakes like the Xavier Guillory drop over the middle on a third down early in the fourth quarter. That could have been a game changer in terms of the game flow there, but also how this coaching staff is able to kind of call the game. They got to be able to have those answers, not just, scripted drives, or things early on in the game, but as the team makes in-game adjustments, what are your adjustments there? What's the move? What's the counter move? What's the counter to the counter? And going for it. Obviously, football is kind of a chess match. ASU's not been doing well in that regard, so I just need to see them play a full 60 minutes offensively in terms of just being effective is in the first, second, as well as the third and fourth quarters.
For me, number 2, attack on defense, and for goodness sake, force some turnovers. ASU ranks 25th in total defense in the nation. That's pretty dang good, and I'm sure better than a lot of folks would have predicted for this team. They saw an uptick in sacks last week, thanks largely to the great game that BJ Green had. Still, 0 turnovers forced through these first 2 games. Of course, naturally, that ranks them dead last in the nation. ASU needs to interrupt Fresno State's offense. They need to steal some possessions from them because Fresno State is far too talented and effective. And ASU's offense, as of right now, is just not up to that level for them to be able to go toe-to-toe, drive for drive. Things like you saw Colorado, TCU early in the year was just this big shootout and kind of arena football rules. The last team to have the ball is going to win in a 90 to 100 combined point game. That just isn't what you're seeing out of Arizona State. So if they don't stop or slow down Fresno State's offense, I know this isn't really a tremendously articulate or intelligent thing for me to say, but they're not going to win a game. So in order to get back on track defensively, you want to see them be aggressive. You want to see them get to the quarterback, disrupt him. That is something that, at least in these early stages of the 23 season, has proven to rattle Keene a little bit at quarterback for Fresno State. So if ASU can do that and get some turnovers, get some momentum from the defense to transition over to the offense, if they can get a short field for the offense, then you get some of those big plays, you get some scores, people start having fun and getting confidence. Is really a lot of this is going to start with the defense. ASU's defense in this game, and really for the season moving forward, is going to have to shoulder a lot of the burden, much, much more than we thought would be the case, unless some things change.
Yeah, and my number 2 is just kind of on that same note, just be +2 in the turnover differential. So, and everything Joe said, I'll co-sign there. So I'll just jump ahead to number 3. I need ASU's coaching staff to show that they're able to adapt to circumstances. Kenny Dillingham, before or after the first and second game, has said that nobody cares about your circumstances, that no one cares if your team is banged up or has a lot of offensive line injuries or some other key players are down or hurt or something. Doesn't matter. They don't care that you had a long weather delay in the first game. No one cares. Just the end results matter. And this is a coaching staff that knows that they've got some obstacles to overcome, that this is a team with so many new players that are still learning their schemes and kind of, only 2 weeks of actual games are under their belt. But now they all of a sudden have a lot of other challenges in terms of a very depleted offensive line, some challenges on the defensive side with the defensive tackle issues there, some other stuff going on. You just got to be able to adapt, and kind of on the previous point of kind of what's the move, the counter move, and the counter to the counter and so forth. What is their answer going to be? They know that this is a team that needs some positive momentum, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
third and finally for me, I want to see this team have a sense of composed energy for the entire game. What do I mean by that? I'm sure that they're frustrated. I know the fans are frustrated to levels that might be a little extreme for my liking, but everybody should be after these first couple of games. They've just been frustrating couple of games, whether it's the circumstances, to use that word again, from the first week, even in a win, whether it's the matters that we saw or didn't see, especially in the second half last week against Oklahoma State. It's a little unsettling. You obviously don't want to see these athletes come out and play frustrated. You don't want to see them so overwhelmingly jacked up to get out and right the wrongs, like someone who wants to take a home run swing on every pitch when you're down 8 runs. All right, you got to chip away at this thing to make some progress. You want to see them have composure, have focus, but also attack. You don't want to see them lethargic. You don't want to see them thrown in the towel. You don't want to see them worried about injuries or any other matter. So it's a delicate balance to have, something that requires leadership on the sidelines and on the field, so that will test the mettle of Jaden Rashada as a true freshman, again, assuming that he remains QB1, which every indication shows that that's should be the case this weekend. So again, you don't want to see frustration and you don't want to see disorganization, because that's the antithesis of what's going to turn things in a positive direction here. So this is where the leaders need to lead. The players need to do what they can do. Go out there and have some fun, be energetic, but rein it in so that it's not so over aggressive that you put yourself in dangerous positions.
All right, prediction time. I'll get things going there. And this, I mentioned there's a lot riding on this game. It feels a lot weightier than a typical week 3 game, and against a non-conference opponent, that's ultimately not going to matter much in terms of how your conference standing is, and obviously certainly not going to count much towards any kind of postseason. But there's still, I think, a need in that ASU shows some improvement, some steps forward. Now, obviously, that's going to be difficult to do with your personnel issues, whether with the offensive line in the state that it's in, some other key areas there. And obviously, we talked about Drew Pine being back in the mix now, how the quarterback position kind of shakes out there, but you have a lot of advantages in terms of your playmakers. I think your defense is rounding into form, and that can be a formidable opponent, something that can kind of keep you in games as this offense tries to find its identity over the course of the week. And I think this is a good opponent that is talented, but also perhaps not overwhelming, that you still probably have the overall talent edge over in this matchup. And playing at home, as ASU's done 3 weeks in a row, and still it has 5 more home games after this, is going to be pretty crucial, I think, for the kind of short and long-term development. I think this is a game where ASU is probably going to start off fast, because that's, we're starting to get some more data points here, and they're kind of a team that's probably going to start off fast. How are they going to finish? That's going to be the big thing. I think that this is a team that's pretty pissed off given their performance. They're ready to kind of show that they're ready to be better than what they are, because I think ultimately they are. But as much as you show in practice or have flashes in games, you need to start to put it together consistently. And that's the thing that's been missing for ASU, that full 60 minutes, and not having that letdown where you have complementary football where your offense is not hanging your defense out to dry like we saw a week ago. I think this is going to be real close. It's going to kind of be a blow for blow type game. I don't think either team's going to run out to a multi-score lead throughout the way. I think ultimately, though, it's probably going to be one of those games that the home team probably has a little bit of advantage. I think ASU is going to be a little bit fired up playing at home at Mountain America Stadium. 28-27 Devils.
So we know when this 2023 season will end. What we don't know is what the path is going to look like to get from where we are here today to that ending point in Tempe in late November in that rivalry game. I'm not saying that this game against Fresno State is make or break, must win, do or die, whatever cliche that you want to assign to it. But it is something like that, because the trajectory of this season that, again, we know is not going to result in any level of postseason appearance, I think a lot really hinges on what happens in this game, because the weaknesses, the opportunities are pretty much out on the table this week in practice and in film and all the development that happens with the staff and the players. It's pretty clear what areas need to be improved. So now it's a matter of putting together the strategic game plan to get there and executing that on the field. So I'm confident that this is going to be an opportunity that ASU is going to be eager to jump into, because I'm sure that a lot of the players want to prove more than what's been seen, again, especially on offense over these last 2 games, of course, the first 2 games of this 2023 season. So this is a tremendous opportunity, especially when you look ahead to the schedule that is upcoming and all of those ranked teams in the Pac-12, many of whom ASU will be playing over the next few months. So the difference between going 2-1 in non-conference and 1-2 in a season where you want to take as many on-field and off-field victories as you possibly can, to me, is a very, very important thing. I feel like ASU is going to come out with some energy. I feel like this is it's a perfect situation for the weirdness of college football to get weird. Kind of like the legendary Roddy Piper said, when you think you got all the answers, I change the questions. It's kind of like that kind of situation. When you think you got this ASU team figured out, maybe they'll do some things that'll surprise you. Maybe they'll do some things that'll put a smile on your face. Maybe this offense will be clicking a little bit. We've talked about it multiple times through this preview of Fresno State. There are things about this Bulldog defense that I think offer some opportunities for the Sun Devil offense. So this, to me, again, just strikes me as one of those games that it would just make sense for ASU to pull out some things and that they haven't seen, buck some trends, get some positivity going in the right direction, and leave Mountain America Stadium with a victory. So I am saying that the Sun Devils will claim a 31-28 win Saturday against Fresno State.
And regardless, they're going to look really good because the equipment staff's got some absolutely the look's going to be good, Joe. I'm just going to say a little tease to our friend Cole Streeper's ASU uniformity column. It's going to be a good looking game. And also, that's going to do it for this episode of Speak of the Devils. I'd like to thank our great guests, Andrew Marden, Stephen Miller, and Tevin White. Make sure you stay with us on the social media side of things. Obviously, a lot of good content coming your way on multi-platforms, Joe. We are on social media and YouTube as well. So you can follow the show on Twitter at SOTD Podcast, Instagram, Speak of the Devils, on YouTube, Facebook, and give me a follow everywhere at bdenny29.
And you can follow me at Joe Healy 42. A huge thank you to the sponsors that hook us up that we've mentioned throughout the show. And an additional thank you to Sun Devil Family Charities. We are very, very grateful. They're a long time. They're actually our very first sponsor.
There you go.
Back when, almost 10 years ago. They are, of course, a 501c3 nonprofit organization created primarily for the purpose of raising funds to provide financial assistance to Arizona State University alumni, students, staff, and immediate family members adversely affected by medical issues. Monetary donations are always appreciated and support those in need due to unexpected medical conditions. They also have volunteer and sponsorship opportunities available that you can learn about on their website. And calling all you cornhole enthusiasts, Saturday, October 14th, and yes, that is ASU's bye week, so there's no game to conflict with this event. Sun Devil Family Charities presents its Fall Fling at the Mile, a fundraiser cornhole tournament at 100 Mile Brewing Company near Scottsdale Road and the 202. All buy-ins get a couple food and drink tickets, and the winning team of the competitive division takes home $700. I might have to sharpen up my cornhole game. I am terrible. I am so bad at it, and I'm not good at things I'm not good at. But you know what? It's a good time. If you excel at the sport of cornhole, check this out. All proceeds, of course, benefit Sun Devil Family Charities. To register for the Fall Fling at the Mile and to learn more about Sun Devil Family Charities and other ways to support them, check them out online at sundevilfamily.org and be sure to follow them on Instagram at sundevilfam and on Twitter at sunDevil_family.
Once you're done supporting our amazing sponsors, make sure to drop us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. Joe and I will be back next week to recap the battle with the Bulldogs and preview the conference opener against USC.